I do hope you can see me today from where you are.
Ich bin ein Berlin.
If I'm generally anything, I guess I'm generally miserable. This modern world of science and invention is of particular interest to women.
The people, I would say, there is no patent. Would you patent the sun?
I regard myself as a soldier, though a soldier of peace.
Welcome to the Biographers.
I always like make up songs for the dogs, and I'm like, yes, singing a little jingle.
I know you do this.
I'm singing a little jingle, but then I'm like, is this a jingle that's someone else's jingle or am I actually making the jingle?
I think it's sometimes a combination of the two. You know,
it's definitely kind of weird. So, folks, sidebar: I've had the plague. I don't know what it was. It took about 9-10 days to get to where I felt like I was back in the land of the living. It was odd too, because it was like the first couple days, it was just like a sore throat, and I didn't really feel that bad. And then it was like, and I just Googled like, you know, what are the stages of a cold, and then like what are the stages of COVID, and what are the which COVID is it is a cold, it's a COVID virus, coronavirus. Anyway, but I didn't remember this. I guess days 1 through 3 are like one level, and then days 4 through 7 are the level.
Oh.
And so that was I was experiencing, and I was like, I always guess I thought it was like you're sick, the most sick at the beginning, and then it just progressively gets better. Not for me this time. But now I've got Phoebe's sexy phlegm, so I could maybe just belt out smelly cat.
The better
smelly
version.
Cat.
The version that everybody else likes.
Are they feeding you? While Daniel coughs. Smelly cat, smelly cat. Yeah, it's not that sexy.
You sound great.
It's not your fault. I could keep
And
going.
people are turning off the episode.
Won't take you to the vet. No, okay. Obviously not their favorite pet.
Oh
Poor smelly cat. Anyway, I guess we could get started or something. I have Avicii here to play at the end of the episode for you on my computer. Yeah, I guess we're here. Welcome to the Biographers Podcast with me, Aubrey, and
Daniel.
We're
Still figuring out how to do introductions.
well, logistically, Daniel's like testing the levels, and we just start talking, and then he hits record, and then I'm like, blah, 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 blah.
That was good. Nailed it.
Nailed it. We are going to start today with our first in our series about Abigail Adams.
Woo-woo.
So this will be our furthest back in time subject. She was before Queen Victoria.
I'm excited, man.
So yeah, should we get started?
We should. I'll say from a personal note, I'm really excited because one of the first, the first biography I ever read was in like 7th grade, and it was Teddy Roosevelt. And then took a very long hiatus on biographies until like after high school, basically. But one of the only ones that I like really got into, and truth be told, I never even finished it, and I need to at some point. It was the biography of John Adams, obviously Abigail Adams' husband and the second president of the United States. And, you know, I forgot most of it, truth be told, because it was over 15 years ago. I just remember always going, man, John Adams was awesome. And I feel like we didn't, you know, historically through our history classes and stuff, give him a lot of credit. So
yeah, it's
I'm
like
very
everyone's
excited.
like George Washington, and
Thomas
then like
Jefferson, Abe Lincoln, like very like these big names, but then you're like,
and John Adams.
But I think a really good example is something like the musical Hamilton, where previously I was sitting there going, yeah, $10 bill, Alexander Hamilton, he did some stuff, right? And then this musical kind of came out that was like, yeah, we have the checks and balances for our Federal Reserve because of this guy, and we're able to have the finances and the economy that we do because of this guy. And like, I have a feeling that's going to be John Adams, but I don't know. You'll help me along the way here.
Yeah, and I mean, so I do remember the show with Paul Giamatti too that came out, but I don't remember if I actually watched it. It might have been one of those things because it was 2008, so it was like we could record shows, but like you had, you know, DVRs were persnickety, and so I may go back and watch it.
You should.
I just the other thing that is interesting though, this is Abigail Adams's biography.
Right.
And so I am getting and mentioning some of John Adams, but I'm really trying to focus on her as the person and not just the wife of John Adams. So it's funny because you're going to probably know some things that I'm definitely not going to touch on, having read that biography. But the good news is that just means there's more to go out there and learn.
Totally.
And just in the bit of research I've done so far, they just seem like people that you would have wanted to be friends with.
I can totally see that.
Although they might be a little like, he might be a little like surly, but they're funny. And
Cool.
they clearly loved each other.
Yes.
And so I think it's interesting. It's funny because she lived quite a while, 100 years-ish, not 150, more, I don't know. I guess I need to do the math, but like 75 years before Queen Victoria. And Queen Victoria was really interesting, and she definitely had some snark. Like, she was very sassy, but then it was all like, oh, my beloved Albert, nah. And Abigail Adams is not like that.
I feel like, and I feel like you're going to explore this more as we go on with the character and everything like that, but I would imagine that a big part of it had to do, frankly, with just being American. There were different values, there were different things that women were called to do in America than probably, I would imagine, don't quote me on this, I'm just making a guess, versus somewhere like the UK, England, right?
Yeah, well, don't forget, they were born in America. However, it wasn't that long that people had been in America too.
Yeah.
So, and they're under British colonial rule in at least through this part of the series too. So, but you're right, like there was this kind of, well, we'll get into it.
Yeah.
There was this, we are not British, like we are American.
Right.
And so we'll get into it, but let's get started. So let's begin with the life of Abigail Adams. You might know her as the wife of John Adams, which we just mentioned, the first vice president of, the second president of, and a founding father of the United States. Because of this, she was the first second lady and the second first lady of the United States. They didn't call them first and second ladies back then, but she was.
I had to think about that. I was like, wait,
because he was vice president first. So she was the first second lady and the second first lady. I thought that was funny. She was also the mother of John Quincy Adams, who became the sixth president of the United States. Now, she shares a unique, fact position of being both a wife of one of and a mother of one of the presidents of the United States. She shares this with only Barbara Bush, the late Barbara Bush, who was married to George H.W. Bush and was the mother of George W. Bush. So kind of interesting that there's only two women who've ever had that distinction.
Interesting. Not only being the first lady, but having a child who then went on to be the president.
Yes. Well, remember, Jeb was running for president too there. That would have been, lots that I guess Barbara would have beat her out on the most presidents in the family.
We have adamantly decided that we're not going to talk any form of politics on this podcast.
Oh no, I was just saying.
I will say that the legacy of the Bushes in America is undisputed. You know what I mean? It's a strong, crazy legacy.
Honestly, I might find it interesting to do a Barbara Bush or other presidents' wives too. I just think it's interesting. So we'll get into a little bit more about that in a second. Abigail was an avid proponent of women's rights, specifically to the education of women and to property, which you couldn't own property at this point in time. She regretted her lack of formal education, but made do by learning from her friends and family members, which was the custom of the time. She was self-taught in French. She translated a letter that was in French on her own, I guess. I mean, she obviously had reference books, but she was self-taught in French. She translated a letter that she had located and used whatever tool she had at her disposal. And despite her own opinions of her education, she is considered by historians to be well-educated for her time and well-regarded all around. In fact, there's been a periodic ranking of first ladies that's done by the Siena College Research Institute, which, whatever, this place. And they've done it since 1982. Abigail Adams has been second only to Eleanor Roosevelt for 4 of the 5 times they've done this ranking. The other time, In 1993, she was ranked third after Eleanor Roosevelt and Hillary Clinton.
Interesting. Do you happen to know what the criteria is for those?
I think they just, I didn't look too far into it. They just looked at like, I think just influence and all different things like that. So
sort of like ranking best presidents sort of a thing? It's like it's pretty subjective.
Yeah, first lady, it's very subjective. She was anti-slavery in a time when slavery was obviously legal. She gave birth to 6 children, 4 of which would live on to adulthood. She was known to care not only for her own children, but also nieces, nephews, other family members throughout her life. She wrote more than 2,000 surviving letters, so that's the ones that are around still, of which are roughly 1,100 letters sent between her and John. Wow. In the mid to late 1700s, letters were obviously the only real means of correspondence. And so they were really well composed, written in a way that you could get to know the person who wrote them by reading them. It's not the same as like I'm sending an email or a text message. I mean, it was really, you got to imagine them sitting there like by lamplight, candlelight or whatever, writing this letter and thinking like they haven't seen the person in a week or a while. And it's more tedious to write because they're probably using like a quill and ink. Yeah. And you have to be thoughtful, and it's not just like type, and it's done.
They've probably also been like walking around all day thinking about all the things that they want to write to that person and formulating sentences and all this type of stuff because, I mean, frankly, they wouldn't have had the stimulation that you and I constantly have today.
They wouldn't have the overwhelm. And also, whenever I think of something, I just like text Aaron immediately. Totally. It's just like, it's
in and out of your head.
Yeah, because there's so many things coming in that if I don't tell him immediately, I'm never going to remember to.
Totally.
So definitely a different time. Because of Abigail's strong influence on her husband's presidency, or his entire political career, really, not just presidency, some critics would call her Mrs. President. She did tend to agree with John on politics, but there's documentation that he would not proceed with policies until Abigail signed off.
Whoa.
So he would be like, okay, I'm going to do this, whatever, act or something. And she'd be like, okay, it's good. Or she'd give him feedback.
Wow, that's crazy.
On the flip side, she did not have a problem being critical of him if she felt the need. He's widely known as somewhat arrogant, a little crotchety, and he called Abigail saucy, and she kept him in line. So my primary sources for the series are a couple books, but these 2 main books. Abigail Adams by Woody Holton and My Dearest Friend, Letters of Abigail and John Adams, which is published by the Massachusetts Historical Society and edited by Margaret A. Hogan and C. James Taylor. Because I kept reading it as James Taylor, but it's not James Taylor. The Massachusetts, the Historical Society Letters book is cool because there have been various publications of letters between John and Abigail. With 1,100, they obviously had to make a selection. I think in this book, it's like 278 or something.
Jeez.
Her grandson had published some of their letters. Like there were over time, but this is the most recent one. And they really took great care to not edit them. So like sometimes there were like things that they literally just like they wrote the wrong thing, like a typo or kind of like a typo, but a righto. I don't know. An error.
A righto.
New term. Back in the olden days, we had rightos.
It was an English person going, righto.
Righto. So anyway, they kind of published them the way that they were. And they didn't actually even add that much context in the book, too, of this publication of letters. And other versions, they would be like, well, this is what they really meant.
Okay.
And so, and it's some of the same letters that had been published in the past, but also a lot of new and different ones. I will also say this, and I'm not trying to dig on Woody Holton, but for some reason, I'm just not in love with the writing style. And so I was really struggling as I was reading the first section of it. And then I was like, oh, man, this is going to be tough because the author of my book on Victoria was just there was just something about the way that she wrote that I just was really able to consume it really quickly. Then I picked up My Dearest Friend and started reading the letters between Abigail and John in the period of the biography section that I had read. And it was cool because it like supplemented it and it put it in their own words. Like the other book was quoting some things from those letters, but it was like one line out of context. And one thing that was kind of hard, it wasn't that long ago, but the English was different. And it's
Very.
just like today with Gen Z, you're like, what does that word mean? And because I literally sometimes watch TikTok videos and I'm like, I don't understand. And I'm like, I'm not that old. But anyway, I'm looking back and I was reading some of these, I don't know, phrases like plopped into Abigail Adams's biography. And I was like, I don't understand. It's like when you were in high school and your English teacher had to explain the line from Shakespeare. Be like, this is what it actually means. So anyway, I'm glad I have both books to kind of side by side.
And you are not alone. My last series, I've mentioned this to you, that I did on Ian Fleming. The author, Andrew Lysette, lots of great information, lots of great research. Andrew, love you. Thank you for your work. But my friend, this was in the mid-90s, so maybe it was a different time to be writing.
Also,
but it was,
yeah, I think it was
very, I struggled to get through it as well. Let's put it that way. It was just very, sometimes complicated where it felt like it didn't need to be. There was also, I mentioned this to you before the past, there was a point where Ian Fleming wrote something and he quoted Ian Fleming in the book. And there was a word that I had never heard of. So I looked it up and went, oh, that's what that word means. Cool. And then within 2 or 3 pages, Andrew Lysette had used that same word, in his own writing and just describing things. And I was like, that's not cool. You can't like steal somebody else's word and then just keep using it all the time or whatever. Whatever. I get it. It would just, all I'm saying is I feel you. Sometimes it is a struggle. This next book I've got I'm working on is breeze.
It's funny because I was reading just a total, like, not trash. It's not a trash novel, but it's like a fantasy novel that's not complex or like intellectual or anything. The author is Canadian, and I wonder, she was just using some words for things. Have you ever heard the word copse, like COPSE, for a grouping of trees?
Oh gosh, I mean, maybe, but it's one of those where like if I read the word in one of my old fantasy novels that I used to like to read or something, I would have been like, I don't know what that is. Moving on, because I don't have the internet.
Luckily with Kindle, you just put your finger on the word and it's like, this is the definition of the word. But then she was just using it so much and I was like, what about a grove? Like, I don't know.
A wood?
Yeah, or a group of trees. Anyway, but it was just kind of funny because I was like, I feel like I'm pretty well read and educated. Like I did okay on the SATs. I took AP English.
Yeah.
Anyway, okay. Abigail Smith was born November 22nd, 1744 in Weymouth, Massachusetts, a coastal farming community 14 miles southeast of Boston. I looked this up because I like pronunciation to be correct. Because Plymouth.
I was going to say, I would assume it would have been Weymouth.
So I was going to say Weymouth, and then I looked on Google and I did pronunciation and it said Weymouth. So I don't know if there's somebody from the Boston area who can tell me if it's still called Weymouth or Weymouth.
I'll ask Jamie. Jamie's from Boston.
Jamie's going to know. He's from Boston.
He does a really good Boston accent.
Okay. Park your car and have it yard.
Yeah, but he can do it with anything. He has an
I
uncle.
can only say what the guys from Car Talk said.
Yeah, I can only say that exact one phrase or whatever. It's the pack had cab yad.
Gosh, do you remember Car Talk? Did you ever listen to that?
I've never even heard of it.
It was on NPR. It was these brothers and they just talked about cars and it was hysterical. And it was on NPR on like Saturdays, but one of the brothers died and they don't do it anymore. I think they do like old episodes, but like replay them. Anyway, Boston. Okay. Weymouth itself was founded in 1622. It is the second oldest settlement in Massachusetts, with Plymouth being the first, having been founded just 2 years earlier in 1620.
Wow.
The landscape consisted of wild, heavily wooded areas with granite boulders protruding through, interspersed with farms and salt marshes in the lowlands. When storms would come to town, seaweed would litter the beaches and would nourish the land. So despite the somewhat tedious landscape and like winters, the soil itself was really fertile because of the seaweed coming up.
Okay, interesting.
Weymouth is a suburb of Boston, and today you can see the Boston skyline from many points in the town. I couldn't confirm if you could see Boston from Weymouth back then because I don't know if it was like
Tall enough or anything like that.
tall enough or bright enough.
Yeah.
But you can today.
Cool.
So yeah, if somebody has a time machine and could tell us, that would be cool. Abigail's father, Reverend William Smith, was a farmer and a parson, which is a Protestant minister. Her mother, Elizabeth Quincy Smith, was from a prominent family of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. The Quincy's arrived in 1633, 3 years after the colony itself was formally founded.
Crazy.
Abigail's grandfather, John Quincy, the family names come from.
I was just about to say, I didn't know that the Quincy came from Abigail's side. That's really cool.
So he held the position of Speaker of the Massachusetts Assembly for 40 years. So he was like a high up politician kind of.
I'm sorry, 40 years you said?
40 years.
Jeez.
His wife, Elizabeth Norton Quincy, Abigail's maternal grandmother, was described later by Abigail as, quote, the person with whom I chiefly lived during the early period of my life. Not that she actually lived with her, but they visited a lot.
Oh, okay.
Like daily. Grandparents John and Elizabeth Quincy lived an 8-mile round trip walk from Abigail's home, and she would trek there more times than she could count to visit with Elizabeth, who was said to be, quote, lively with a cheerful disposition that animated all around her. This was in contrast to grandfather John's remarkable neutrality. He was said to never praise anyone, but also never speak evil of them. Also, interestingly, Abigail was related on her mother's side to another founding father. Her cousin, Dorothy Quincy, married John Hancock.
Oh, crazy.
Abigail's mother, Elizabeth Quincy Smith, was devoted and reserved, a juxtaposition to her mother's own vivaciousness. She left the house every day on one social call or another, as was customary for the wife of a parson to do. She kept her finger on the pulse of the community, identifying parishioners in need. Illness did not deter her, and when Abigail was about 6 years old, there was an outbreak of diphtheria that killed 150 of the town's 1,200 residents. It was mostly children that died, but many heads of household as well. And Elizabeth Smith helped by bringing food, firewood, supplies, whatever she could to these families.
Wow.
Now, there were a few reasons that the Smiths were able to be so charitable. Man, that's this. The crud is just making my voice crack. They were so charitable. For one, Elizabeth had received property from her parents. Remember, they were like a rich Quincy family.
Okay.
So she had received property from her families, her parents, the Quincy's. Additionally, Abigail's father, William, was more shrewd than the average minister. He'd actually convinced the parishioners to sell him the parish house. So usually if you're like a minister, you live in a house that's owned by the church, but they sold it to him.
So he like owned the property?
He owned the house, yeah. So, I don't know. There was a little bit about like, there was kind of like a squabble between like the North Parish and the South. It started kind of getting a little complicated and boring to me.
I can imagine things getting a little like, I don't know, if like a preacher nowadays did something like that. We're still seeing stuff like that. We're like, hey, how much do you own? And we're like, having issues with it and stuff. So
yeah, I don't think it was as nefarious as like that guy down in Texas. Let's just say that.
Some of the bigger names these days in that world.
Yeah. Anyway, so he convinced them to sell the Paris house to him a decade before. And eventually they actually added on to the house. And then he had a small but reliable income as the parson because it was required by law that you support the Puritan church. You had to pay your tithes.
Huh. The law? Was it you had to pay tithes?
Yeah.
Wow, I didn't know that.
But I think it was that 10% that you always hear probably. In addition to the income from his working farm. So he was a farmer. They had a farm, and he also had his income as a reverend, I guess, basically.
Okay.
At the time, he owned 4 slaves, which is notable because later in life, Abigail was outspoken against slavery, and she was speaking from personal experience.
Okay.
Reverend Smith would become the longest serving minister of the Weymouth Church, eventually serving for 48 years, which ended in his death in 1783. He took a page out of his father-in-law's book about not speaking negatively of others, but he also encouraged his children to praise others and not to gossip. In fact, he instructed them to turn the conversation back toward, quote, things rather than persons. Huh. So if Abigail was talking to some friends and they started to gossip, she would be like, oh, well, let's just talk about the birds. She'd like pull it back.
Non-confrontational.
It was just a way to be delicate and not stir anything up. Also, they were the children of the minister of the town. They had an expectation, I guess you could say.
They were not tea spillers.
Yeah. It's funny you say that because the Boston Tea Party will be coming in the next episode.
Sweet.
Anyway, the Smiths kept with the custom of the times and didn't send Abigail to any sort of like additional schooling. She she would have wanted to go off to a school, but they didn't do that. At the time, you really only taught girls reading and basic arithmetic. And I'm sure that was like in this sort of family. There may have been poorer families that obviously that wasn't even happening. They cited Abigail's weak health as the reason. Her mother was really overprotective and basically was like, you're sick.
Huh.
Given the outbreaks of disease that were rampant during Abigail's younger years, the decision to keep her home might very well have saved her life. There's a note that Abigail was forbidden from going to a Harvard graduation social event that was like the event of the century, or not, I mean, the year, I guess you could say, when she was like a teenager because of her health. Her mother said, no, you can't go.
Wild.
Her mom was a bit of a helicopter mom.
Now, I have a question for you, and we can totally edit this out if the answer is yes and you want to get to it later on. But I keep hearing about you saying Smith and girls' education. And I'm thinking of Smith University in
I don't know.
Massachusetts. In Boston, I'm fairly
this
sure.
Out, and I don't know.
Okay.
There's not been anything so far.
Okay.
I could Google it really quick, but
no, just maybe something to tuck away into your brain and look into.
Yeah,
in case
I can look into it.
It's something like a fact you can drop in, because it's an all-girls university. You know what I mean? It stands to reason that it would have come potentially from Abigail's lineage, who valued education.
I'm just going to look it up.
There you go.
Now this is the ADD. You shouldn't have done this.
Yeah.
Well, it was founded in 1875, so it was long after she died.
Okay.
So I don't know that it necessarily had anything to do with that.
That's fair.
It says it was founded by Sophia Smith in 1875.
Well, I wonder if Sophia Smith is connected to the Smiths.
Maybe.
I know, that's for a different time.
Actually, you say that, but the Smiths, they had 3 daughters.
No, I wasn't joking. No, I was like, that
no,
very well.
But what I'm saying is that I guess she had cousins, but Reverend Smith had no sons to carry on the name.
Oh, okay.
Is what I'm saying.
Fair
so
enough.
It's possible that maybe it's Smith's a pretty freaking common name.
That's true. Very true.
Anyway, that being said, Grandmother Quincy gave Abigail a lot of excellent lessons, and Abigail said that this was due to her, quote, happy method of mixing instructions and amusement together, which is kind of like,
what we do.
Yeah, what we do. It's literally, it's edutainment. Thank you, Grandmother Quincy. Abigail and her friends would also read and exchange books and then discuss them. We didn't discuss books, but when I was in middle school, like we'd go to the mall on the weekend. I'd get like a book. My parents would buy me a R.L. Stine book and I'd read it. And my other friends would get like an R.L. Stine book and then we'd trade them around.
Yeah, totally. It's like early days book clubs.
Yeah, basically just childhood book clubs, but also garbage that really didn't help me, man. I feel like I should find an R.L. Stine book and like read it.
I remember them being like, I mean, it got you reading. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, it got me reading. I mean, I would read a book a night. I don't know how I did my homework.
I've only recently gotten more into reading. Halfway because of this podcast.
I used to read a lot, but it was always like just entertainment.
Yeah, wow, that's crazy. Cat's the same way.
I know I need to read that book she gave me. It's been my turn, so it's on my nightstand. Anyway. Also, at the time, there were a lot of letters written between friends and family. It's notable that many of young Abigail's letters did not survive. Survive sounds like there was like a fire or something. It's just like they weren't retained. Yeah. A tiny amount compared to what was saved between her and her future husband, John. But the simple act of writing and exchanging ideas contributed to her education. One of the few letters from her childhood that did survive was between her and her cousin Isaac, where she accepted his invitation to correspond. This was a thing. So you would like write to someone and say, hi, I would like to correspond with you. Do you accept? And then they would accept.
And
like
there was a friend request.
Yes, kind of. Then there was like this other girl that she like, this is where like the writing of the other book I'm reading is like confusing me. This other girl asked her to correspond, or she asked her to correspond. And like one of them said no, but it was like, I think it was kind of like a joke, but then they just didn't correspond. I don't really know. It was confusing. But yes, you had to accept an invitation to correspond.
Wow.
So people would write each other a letter inviting them to correspond. And in Abigail's response, where she said yes to her young cousin, by the way, she said, yes, I will correspond. She talks about learning and aging and said that, quote, I love this quote, in youth, the mind is like a tender twig, which you may bend as you please, but in age, like a sturdy oak and hard to move. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's so wise. And this is like she's a teenager when she wrote that.
Hey, look, I get it. I know that all generations change and all generations look back at the previous and go, they were better and the new one is worse. But I get it. Like you hear something like this from a teenager and you're like, I am barely talking like that.
I know. It's pretty.
I'm 35.
It's very wise. And then like also just even thinking about, I feel like as people I know have gotten older, they just are more settled in their ways. Now, on the flip side, let's play devil's advocate there. They've had more experience. They've learned more things. They are maybe taking that I'm deciding on this thing based on my experience and knowledge. So when you're young, you don't really know what you're talking about.
You know, it's true, and people are generally more set in their ways as the years go on, except for, as we all know, Jeff Goldblum. Guy is perpetually 22.
Another American treasure.
Another.
Can we get Jeff Goldblum and Jennifer Coolidge in a movie together?
Oh, that'd be great. But I might go on a limb here and say that of all the celebrities in the world, Jeff Goldblum is like top 2 or 3 of who I'd want to be my best friend.
Well, okay, so Keanu Reeves, let's get him in there.
He's up there.
He's up there.
He's up there.
I'd want Jennifer Coolidge to be one. She's
Mel Brooks is up there for me too.
There's so many. There is a show. I'm always plugging shows if they ever want to sponsor us. Amy Schumer has a show called Life and Beth that she's written and produced.
It's now like isn't it like the continuation?
Second season.
Yeah.
I just watched it all while
no,
I
but
was.
Isn't it like that she did Life After Beth, right? And then isn't this?
I don't know what Life After Beth.
I could have sworn that you were the one that told me about Amy Schumer's show Life After Beth, and you really liked it.
I might have said Life After Beth when I meant Life and Beth.
I could have.
I don't think there's more than one, but there might be.
Yeah, anyway.
This is just she's Michael Cera is her love interest, and like anyway, there's a scene where Jennifer Coolidge plays a small character, and it's funny. It's just funny.
Life After Beth had Aubrey Plaza. I was dead wrong about that.
Yeah. Okay.
Dead
and
wrong.
I don't think I've seen that one.
I haven't either, but it's got her and John C. Reilly and somebody else. And
okay, that's not the one I was thinking of. The other Aubrey Plaza movie where she like becomes obsessed with this online influencer girl. Anyway, whatever. That one was okay.
I'm just thinking of Aubrey Plaza in the second season of White Lotus, and she killed it.
Yeah, she did. Aubrey Plaza's, first of all, a fellow Aubrey.
Also another national treasure.
A king of the elves, because that's what Aubrey means.
Really?
I swear I've told you that before.
No, you've told me about McCarthy. You've told me about that, and that was your
I don't know what McCarthy means.
I thought you told me something about that, and then it was Aubrey was like your grandfather's name. You told me that.
Aubrey, but
was
that was the other side. That's the grandfather on my grandmother's side. My mom's mother's side. Anyway, Aubrey means king of the elves. Oh. So whenever I meet an Aubrey or like someone who's like, oh, my niece is named Aubrey or my cousin's named Aubrey, I'll be like, do you know what Aubrey means? And they're like, no. And I'm like, it means king of the elves.
So if you ever go to Iceland, you're saying people are just going to worship you because like I think it's something like 30% of the population still believes in elves.
Oh, I did not know that.
Have you not watched the Eurovision with Will Ferrell and Rachel McAdams?
I guess not. I thought maybe I had.
You should. It's called Eurovision, the Legend of Fire Saga or something like that.
Okay.
And they're Icelanders, and we'll keep this really short, but more or less there's this whole thing that's involved with the elves in Iceland, and it's hilarious, and you should check it out.
Okay, well, I'm the king of them, so there's that. And I just like to say the king, because now if you look at modern things, it'll be like Aubrey is a girl's name, which it was a man's name, which is why it was king of the elves.
We've talked about it's a feminine Julia.
Yeah, and then I was like, I like to say I'm the king of the elves. Anyway, okay. Where did I stop? Something about sturdy oak. We were talking about sturdy oak, and it was hard to move. The tangents. It's like branches in a tree. Okay. A year later, squirrel on a tree. A year later, Abigail wrote another letter to cousin Isaac, where she enclosed a letter that she translated from French to English that dealt with challenges of women. She devoted a great amount of thoughts to women's status, and some historians have considered her an early feminist. This was wild to be thinking of the things she was thinking at that time. When Abigail and older sister Mary were in their teens, a tutor came along named Richard Cranch, Cranch. And I'm going to call him Cranch from here on out because I just like that. I don't want to call him Richard. I want to call him Cranch.
Definitely sounds like a combination of ketchup and ranch.
I did not think of that. I just think Cranch. To me, he's like tall and kind of wired, like maybe shaped like an Adam Driver a little bit. Okay. Cranch.
Okay.
Anyway, Abigail said that Cranch, quote, put proper books into my hands, who taught me to love the poets and distinguish their merits. Also, all of this stuff is like Old English style. So merits has 2 R's. Books is Bookes.
Oh,
like,
cool.
it's just kind of weird.
Yeah.
And so, like, my Google is like, what? What is this word?
As a kid, I used to see the old, like, every once in a while, I'd see, like, the old bagel shoppy. You know?
Yeah, the
and
bagel shoppy.
I would honestly, as a kid, go shoppy. Why are they spelling it shoppy?
Or like the toy shoppy.
Yeah, and it's just shop.
It's just that. It's just that. So Cranch was a bit of a character himself, having immigrated to Massachusetts from England in 1726. He was trained to make cards, which are not the cards you're thinking of. They were metal combs prepared wool for spinning, like the spinning wheel. So a card was like something that was related to making wool for the spinning wheel.
Oh, I think I know what you're talking about, because when you have to wind the wool, it goes onto like a flat plank kind of a thing that spins. It's not on like a dowel. It's like on a flat thing.
So maybe
I'd
that's
imagine that's what it is, but I don't know.
I tried to de-squirrel myself, so I didn't look too far into it, but there's that. But that's just the beginning. He and his brother-in-law then tried glassworks in Braintree, which future husband John Adams is from Braintree.
Oh, okay.
And that didn't go so well. So then they moved on to candle making from whale oil, which is sad for the whales. By the time that Cranch met Abigail's sister Mary, he was trying to make watches for a living.
Whoa.
There are some anecdotes that John Adams later told about Cranch, about him being swindled into buying a busted carriage. And another time he bought a horse that he didn't need because the horse was just so good. The guy was like, it's a great horse. He just didn't need it.
He's one of those, like, quote unquote entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
Who isn't really one. They just have like a good idea here or there, but then they can never settle with it. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Despite his lack of business acumen, Cranch was a scholar. He was self-trained in Latin, Hebrew, and Greek, and he loved sharing knowledge. Abigail, yearning for it, was a great student, and she tagged along with Mary and Cranch so much that she had ample opportunities to learn from him. Now, I thought that was it. Cranch just knew Mary and was kind of courting her. But then I read another article on a website that said that Cranch was actually a tutor that came to teach them.
Okay.
But that wasn't in my actual biography, and I only read it. I read it in 2 places that were just random websites. So I'm not sure. He may have been hired as a tutor for Mary and Abigail.
And just because there's been a lot of names that have been thrown around, Mary is Abigail's sister,
yes,
right?
and I haven't said this, you're going to hear, but there were 3 daughters. Mary's the oldest, Abigail, and then the youngest is Elizabeth, who goes by Betsy.
Mary, Abigail, and Elizabeth Smith.
Yes.
Cool. Okay.
Also, I didn't mention this because Abigail's nickname was Nabby, and that name will come up again.
That's
Nabby.
Sort of cute in a weird way.
Yeah, Nabby. Anyway, so Abigail just was soaking up all the information. Mary was a couple of years older than Abigail. I don't remember how much, but I don't know, like 2 or 3 years.
Sure.
So Abigail, third wheeling around with her sister and Cranch, ended up where Abigail was 17 and she didn't have a boyfriend.
Oh, wow.
Because she was just like palling around with her older sister. And
Getting her learning on.
Yeah, getting her learning on. John Adams, a young Harvard-educated lawyer, knew the Smiths and was even friends with Mary through Cranch. Diary entries from a few years before showed John criticizing Reverend Smith. He said, and he also said that Abigail and Mary were just like judgmental and like silly girls, and like he was kind of like not a fan of Abigail, Mary, or their father.
Okay.
Oh, and sorry, I went into a tangent in the middle of the sentence, but Abigail and Mary were a little judgmental. They had made fun of John for his outward vanity.
Outward vanity?
He was a little bit full of himself.
I did not know
and
that.
they were teasing him about it. And so he didn't like that. So he wrote it in his diary. Ironic, because John Adams was a bit vain, self-important young man. He was a little bit socially awkward too.
Interesting.
Nevertheless, he wrote a letter 2 years later to Mary as an indirect way to court Abigail. Kind of like when you're a kid and you give your crush's friend a note about your crush.
Yes.
So he was like, Mary, let me tell you about how much Abigail is wonderful. And so then Mary had to go tell Abigail. Anyway, in all seriousness, he'd been spending time with Abigail and Mary because his best friend was Cranch. So he was kind of around. And
Oh, okay.
they met in Braintree. To be clear,
So wait, let me put this together. So Cranch and John Adams, they were friends for a while.
they knew each other.
They knew, probably from Harvard, I'm assuming.
They said Braintree. Just
from living in the
being
same
in
town.
Braintree, yeah.
And then so at some point when Mary and Abigail were going to meet up with Cranch probably for a
they just
study
crossed
or something like
paths.
that
Yeah.
across paths in Braintree was when John officially met Abigail and was
And the physical location of like Braintree and Weymouth, it was all kind of close.
Sure.
So like that's how he knew of Reverend Smith. Like he was able to so it was a small community.
Right,
So
and I
you
think
kind of just knew people.
You said a few minutes ago that the outbreak of diphtheria claimed like 120 or some odd people like that, but the total population was only like 1,200.
Yeah, so we're talking about small communities.
Right. Like even if it was 3 towns, we're talking about like 5,000 people, potentially 7,000 people total.
And Abigail and Mary's father was a minister. So he
Right.
was like a celebrity.
Big name.
It wasn't just a random farmer, you know? So that was, they just kind of, they all ran in the same circle.
Cool.
I guess you could say.
Cool.
As we would say these days. To be clear though, John was 9 years older than Abigail.
Oh, wow.
It wasn't so bad though, because Cranch was 15 years older than Mary.
Different times.
Different times. On November 25th, 1762, Richard Cranch married Mary in a ceremony conducted by her father, Parson Smith. Around this time, John was maturing and realized he needed someone to help take his vanity and arrogance down a notch. Even though he'd thought Abigail a little bit unladylike in her younger years, he now saw her wit more like, as I said before, quote, sauciness, a spunk that someone like him admired. And it helped that Abigail was becoming a tall, slender, dark-complected beauty.
Right.
After many conversations with her, he would come to describe her as modest, prudent, delicate, soft, sensible, and obliging.
Right on. I like it.
So, she was like a little, I'm a 15-year-old girl, blah, blah, blah. And then she kind of grew up a little bit, and he was like, oh.
Yeah, she developed a little bit, and he was like, okay, right on. I'm into it.
You're not so bad. Now, Abigail did not keep a diary, so we don't have very many letters or written accounts for what turned her affections toward John, because remember, she'd been making fun of him with her sister.
Sure.
As John pursued Abigail, though, he gave her books, and later she said that, quote, he confirmed my taste and gave me every indulgence that books could afford. So history could say that he just wooed her with words. But she was, I'll get into it, but she really wanted to be educated. And so anybody who was giving her books were like the only way that you could learn more things.
So it seems to me like in many, many ways, it doesn't sound like John Adams was necessarily a bad looking man, but in a lot of ways she was very attracted to his mind.
Yeah. And personality. I mean, we'll get into it more.
Yeah, cool.
I mean, at first though, she was like, ugh. Well, and also think about it. When you were 13, 14, 15, somebody who was 23, 24 is like old.
Sure.
I don't know what it was like in the 1700s.
But I will also say when you're younger, it's like, when you make fun of somebody, half the time it's because you already kind of like them maybe a little bit. You know what I mean?
That is good speculation.
So you're like, oh, look at him. He's so vain or whatever. But then like really you're just going, dude, he's a good looking guy over there. And
I'm into him. I have
I'm
a crush.
really into him. But he knows he's good looking. So, sort of
because he
thing.
was a cocky dude.
Yeah.
So Abigail and John were exchanging letters. They invited each other to correspond. Hers were more reserved, and his were a little bit gushy and kind of awkward. He referred
That's guys for you.
He referred to 6 years younger sister Betsy, Elizabeth, the younger sister, who was 6 years younger than Abigail.
So Elizabeth went by Betsy?
Yes.
Okay.
He referred to Betsy as his daughter Betsy. Like, I don't know. I don't think it was necessarily weird. He was courting Abigail.
And probably a little bit meant to be probably seen as like affectionate or something like that. Yeah.
He talked about his dreams that he had about Abigail. In one letter, something that bordered indecent, he said, "Patience, my dear. Learn to conquer your appetites and passions." Ooh. He called Abigail Miss Adorable.
That's so cute.
She would reply to him as Mr. Friend.
Okay. Didn't see that one coming.
It sounds cold, but apparently at the time it was a relatively intimate thing to call someone friend.
Oh, okay. Mr. Friend.
I mean, you wouldn't just call anybody friend. Like, it was especially a woman to a man, I think. So,
okay.
So I just thought when I read that at first, I was like, damn. But anyway, it was pretty intimate.
It sounds cold. I'll be
Yeah, I
honest.
know, it does, especially after calling her Miss Adorable.
Yeah.
Anyway, many of her letters to him would be expressing concern about his health, which is a thing that I think women do about men. Like, are you taking your vitamins? Are you
care of
eating healthy?
yourself.
Yes. However, she would give him an occasional sexual tease
Uh-oh.
in one letter after not being able to see him the night before. I think they were meant to see each other and it didn't happen. She said, quote, "We might, if we had been together, have been led into temptation."
Dun, dun, dun.
Now, finally, she wanted to impress him. Again, she was a bit self-conscious about her schooling, and she used her letters to express her smarts. She would reference literary characters, the Bible, stories of the Prophet Muhammad, philosophy. In her early years, she came across the concept of sensibility, which was a cultural movement from the time. It had many meanings, but the most interesting to Abigail was the concept that all humans were born with an innate moral sense. It was in contrast to the philosophy of John Locke that all ideas that people had came from observation and experience. So this was like a nature versus nurture kind of thing. And in sensibility, you were obliged to be affected by the plight of your fellow humans. In a letter to John in August of 1763, she referenced the threefold cord from Ecclesiastes in the Bible, which I was kind of Googling, and I feel like I should probably know more of this stuff. But anyway.
What is it? A cord of three strands is not easily broken?
There you go. Something like that. And then I think it's used a lot in marriage, and it's talking about like the threefold thing is a theme in the Bible.
It is.
But she was saying that she and John were linked in three ways. They were lovers, friends, and linked through their humanity, which obliged them to be affected with the distress and misery of their fellow creatures. The theme of sensibility would carry out through their marriage. And this is a theme that is very important to her because she was concerned with women's rights. She was concerned with slavery. She was concerned with all these other things where I think a lot of people were like, life is the way it is.
Now, I hear sensibility and I go to...
I know, Sense and Sensibility,
And
which I'm guessing it's related.
Yeah.
I didn't look under that rock, but...
Okay, I'm curious. It has to be, right?
So-
Some of the same vein.
With what I looked up about the sensibility movement, it was like a whole thing, and then there was a concept of American sensibility in America too.
Okay.
Some other things that were related to that were like the sense, everything that you could observe through your senses. So like enjoying art and enjoying a fine drink or something, which I thought I put in here, and I guess I'd maybe cut that out. But if I come across it again, I'll read it in the way I wrote it. But it's kind of like about awareness and observation and acting based on those sorts of things.
Interesting.
And I don't even know if I did take a philosophy class, but I don't remember talking about sensibility.
No, I took several philosophy classes and I don't remember talking about it either. So
Anyway, okay, so here are a few quotes from letters that were highlighted in the book My Dearest Friend about their courtship and early marriage years. They just had these 4 quotes in there. It's like, these are all good, and I'm just going to say them really quick.
Cool.
Because I want you to get into the minds of these people, and like, I just want you to like them. So from John to Abigail, he said, "Now letter writing is to me the most agreeable amusement, and writing to you is the most entertaining and agreeable of all letter writing."
Aw.
Abigail to John, "And then, sir, if you please, you may take me."
Whoa now.
I think
That probably just means, I'm yours.
interested.
Yeah,
Yeah,
kind of a thing.
yeah.
Like, courtship approved
Yes.
from my side of things. Yeah, I don't think it means what
like
we're...
take me.
Right, like that's a little 21st century.
John to Abigail, and these weren't necessarily like letters right back to back or anything. It was just random quotes. John to Abigail. "It gives me more pleasure than I can express to learn that you sustain with so much fortitude the shocks and terrors of time. You are really brave, my dear. You are an heroine."
Oh,
Not a heroine, but I think it's because H is considered a vowel. I don't know. Anyway, because sometimes H can be considered a vowel, I feel like. I don't know. Abigail to John, this is the last one. "My pen is always freer than my tongue. I have wrote many things to you that I suppose I never could have talked."
that's sort of sweet too.
So this courtship has lasted a few years at this point, and I was surprised to learn that during this time, Abigail and John actually went away together once before they were married.
Whoa, now.
It wasn't a big deal for the time, even though they were, quote, Puritans. So I looked up a little etymology. The word Puritan came from the 17th century movement to purify the Church of England of Catholics.
Oh, okay.
If we remember from our Victoria series, the Church of England did not like Catholics.
No, they did not.
But it didn't necessarily have anything to do with like abstaining from sensual escapades prior to marriage. It was more about purifying from Catholics. So yeah, they went on a trip together to an unknown location and apparently without a chaperone in the fall of 1763.
Wow. That seems very modern.
I don't know. It was American, maybe. Now, Abigail wrote in a letter to a friend, Hannah Green, that traveling with John had made her think about the similarities between taking a trip together and of marriage. So it kind of was like getting her, wheels turning on that.
Sure.
But why did the courtship last so many years? It is suspected that Abigail's parents, the Smiths, just didn't approve of John. He wasn't really well-to-do like Abigail's mother had been, the Quincy's, and they were kind of hoping she would marry up.
Okay.
And also, remember, Cranch is a little bit not that great at money and stuff. And so maybe with marrying Cranch, she's like they're more
worried about everything.
Worried about it. But after so many years, it was like 2.5 years, which is a long time
for
in that
them,
time.
Yeah, for sure.
After so many years, they kind of gave up on objecting, I guess. In the spring of 1764, Abigail and John were trying to agree on a wedding date. He wanted March, and Abigail favored May. So they went to good old friend Hannah Green for arbitration. That was the word that was used. Now, Hannah wisely threatened to, quote, leave you to marry when you can agree. But eventually she just told him April. Split the difference. Okay. Wouldn't you know it? In April, a smallpox epidemic hit.
Uh-oh.
The epidemic of 1764 infected 699 people in Boston, killing 124 of them. This was concerning because John would travel to Boston for work. Luckily, he was a lawyer, so he'd go to Boston.
Okay.
Luckily, though I was surprised by this, you could get inoculated against smallpox in 1764. And I actually read something that as early as 1721.
Yep.
I was not thinking about that sort of thing in this time period. I would think that was more of a Victorian era thing.
That's one of the very few things I remember from that John Adams miniseries is there's a point where it deals with inoculation as well.
Well, I'm about to get into it. Get ready.
Yeah.
Because you know how I love medical procedures.
Oh, you know how I almost pass out for them, so go ahead.
So inoculation against smallpox would give you a lifetime of protection, and only in 1% of cases would it kill you.
Okay, strangely, that's like not that crazy.
Not that crazy.
You know what I mean? Like, it's scary.
One in 100 would die, but the rest would be fully vaccinated. Forever.
Right. A 1% like
so
failure
bad.
rate? That's not horrible.
And I didn't see, I wonder if it did have something to do with like the underlying health of the person. Anyway. The practice of immunization or inoculation is what they called it. So I didn't look to if there's a difference between inoculation and immunization. I've always used them interchangeable, but
I'm fairly confident. I could be wrong about this, but I'm fairly confident. Inoculation is the idea of you're getting the exact disease from an infected person and then introducing that disease into somebody who doesn't yet have it. Immunization is saying we have created something that we can now inject into you that gives you the same like immune response as what inoculation would have done, but we're not doing it with the live bacteria from an active human or whatever.
Yeah, I think that's it. And it's funny, when you even Google immunization, it switches to vaccinate.
Yes.
Anyway.
And I think that's kind of the difference is that immunization / vaccination.
Vaccination.
Yeah. Like vaccinization.
It's funny after a global pandemic that we don't know.
Oh gosh. Anyhow, I'm
well,
fairly
this right
confident
here is
that's the
saying
difference.
it's a synonym. I don't know. There's probably some technical difference, but yeah, that sounds right. I don't know.
I could be wrong. I'm not a medical guy.
Yes. Once again, our regular disclaimer: we are not medical
Don't
professionals.
follow our medical advice.
Okay, so the practice of inoculation, I just said it again, was suggested by an African slave who had seen it done in his home country. I didn't dig into that more either, but I did see like one or two things where it was like it actually came from his home country.
Yeah.
You would insert a small quantity of the virus into the patient's bloodstream. You would have to prepare for the procedure by taking Ipecac to induce vomiting and purge your system.
Oh, wow.
You would then get your inoculation, and you'd have to be quarantined for 3 weeks afterward. The whole process was going to take place in April when they'd finally planned to marry, and they wrote more letters to each other in that 1 month separation than they had in the previous 2.5 years. But they were also closer to each other before. Now, Abigail actually wanted to be inoculated as well, but her parents said no.
Oh, wow.
Because they were all worried about her health, which is funny because you'd think that they'd want her to be inoculated.
To keep her healthy.
Yes. She talked to her uncle, I love this name, Cotton Tufts. Cotton Tufts.
Cotton Tufts.
And he'd been through the procedure just a few weeks before. His endorsement made Abigail sure that John would be fine, but her parents were still in charge of her until she was married off. So they wouldn't let her do it. She was 19 and would pretty much be handed off from her parents to her new husband with no real freedom or rights or ability to make any decisions. But just like today, many young girls, Abigail included, just wanted to get away from her parents. Now, Abigail was more worried that John wouldn't follow the doctor's inoculation preparation instructions, because women are always like, come on, guys, are you doing what you're supposed to do? This included stopping eating meat for a week before. I don't really know why. And Dr. Tufts convinced John to go ahead and follow the instructions of the doctors and listen to Abigail.
Wow.
So he did it, but he was like about to be like, I'm just going to eat meat anyway, which who knows if it actually would have helped or not.
I'd imagine it has something to do with like clearing out your digestive system, you know?
Yeah, and I'm thinking like the bacteria that could be coming from meat.
Yeah.
So that might be it. But I'm sure, I don't know, there's probably more bacteria in meat back then. Anyway.
I'd also be willing to bet that whole notion of like purging your system is like medically, people are just like, no. That is probably the worst thing you could possibly do. I'd be willing to bet, but I don't know.
I'm not sure either. On April 8th, John and his brother took their Ipecac to prepare for the whole ordeal. This is an excerpt from his letter to Abigail about the Ipecac, and it had me in stitches, so I'm going to read it.
Okay.
I'm not going to do an accent because I'm bad at accents. Sunday morning, 10:30, the people all gone to meeting, but myself and companion, his brother, who are enjoying a pipe in great tranquility after the operation of our Ipecac. Did you ever see two persons in one room? And this is so hard. Ipecachuaned together? And then he goes, I hope I have not spelled that ineffable word amiss. I'm like, I don't know how you pronounce it, John. I assure you, they make a merry diversion. We took turns to be sick and laugh.
Jeez.
When my companion was sick, I laughed at him. And when I was sick, he laughed at me. Once, however, and once only, we were both sick together. And then all laughter and good humor deserted the room.
It's all fun and games, so you're puking together.
Upon my word, we both felt very sober, but all is now easy and agreeable. We have had our breakfast of pottage without salt or spice or butter, as the doctors would have it. No spices, just pottage. And are seated with our pipes and our books, happily as mortals preparing for the smallpox, or happily as mortals preparing for the smallpox can desire. But I was just like, I'm like seeing this like comic like blah.
Well, I'm also picturing that happening with guys in like, you know, old American like revolutionary outfits with like the high collars and the coattails
the
and
sleeves,
stuff and the
like
frilly,
the lacy sleeves. Like, don't get your inoculation.
And you also
vomit.
have to remember, everyone, that around this time, this was the British accent was still around.
Yeah.
It was so all through the Americas, it was still like, oh my, oh jolly, that was not a good thing to be
good
expelling.
heavens, I'll be sick.
Like it was them properly throwing up.
I just think it's so funny the way they said it. Just a scene that maybe should be reenacted.
Yeah. I don't remember that from the miniseries.
I guess they left that part out. On Friday, April 13th, which I thought was pretty funny, a Friday the 13th, yikes, John arrived in Boston from Braintree and the doctor arrived. He made an incision in John's arm and inserted a thread contained with smallpox in the wound.
Ugh.
And that was it, the whole procedure. John just needed to wait a few days for the pustules to appear on his skin.
Oh, joy.
But only just a few. This was nothing compared to the possibility of death by smallpox. And those who survived smallpox could be maimed or blinded by the disease. So to John, it was worth the risk.
Yeah, wasn't it like smallpox could cover your whole body with like scars?
It was
basically?
really bad.
Yeah, really nasty.
Yeah. During this time, Abigail and John corresponded via letters carried by one of Parson Smith's slaves, Tom. Tom would bring the letters and books that they exchanged back and forth, and then they would smoke them before giving them to Abigail so she wouldn't get the pox.
Huh.
Now, it's not confirmed, but it's likely that Tom probably had already had smallpox. They said in the book, I hate talking about this stuff, but a slave owner wouldn't risk their slave getting smallpox because they didn't want them to die. It was property.
Oh, wow.
And so he probably had already had it. But the smoking of the stuff was so that Abigail wouldn't get it. And they would just basically burn things and like smoke, hold the thing over and smoke it.
Interesting.
I left this out, but there was something that Abigail said to John about like, I don't know. She was like, can you be sure that the way you wrap your letter, you have like an extra layer on the outside? Because like Tom he rips them accidentally and he's just not good at opening the letters. And then she was like, and also while he's smoking them, I'm just like kind of flittering around him, like waiting for it to be smoked so I can get it. And she compared herself to like a bird. Like she's like, I just am ready, Anyway, it was kind of cute.
Also, for what it's worth, don't skirt around any of this stuff because I get it too. My next series that I'm getting into, there's going to be a lot of stuff around
slavery.
I mean,
we're
going
to
get more in America,
yeah.
And so hey, it is a reality we got to deal with,
Yeah, but I did think that was interesting because I was thinking like, oh yeah, surely they'd just be like, whatever, you can risk it, but they didn't want to have them risk it. Right. That was interesting.
Yeah, that's gnarly.
It was during the quarantine time that Abigail first broached the subject of the women's position. Let me say that again. It was during this quarantine time that Abigail first broached the subject of women's position in society to John. In one letter, she revealed her interest in the status of women, including men's attitudes about women and the innate difference between men and women. In a subsequent letter, she said, quote, I wonder why I write to you with so little restraint, for as a critic, I fear you more than any other person on earth. Then followed by, don't you think me a courageous being? Courage is laudable, a glorious virtue in your sex, so why not mine?
That's awesome.
So this part, like, I'll get into it too, but she talked about like, I'll just write anything to you. But like, she was actually like kind of nervous.
But I mean, for what it's worth, it seems like it's a little bit of credit to John Adams, who I don't know what his responses were like, but it seems like they would have not been critical enough for her to shy away from not continuing, you know?
Because over the next few weeks, she continued to express her fondness for John and continued to cover women's issues.
Sweet. I like it.
So over the next few weeks, Abigail continued to express her fondness for John. The letters were also a little bit filled with gossip, kind of going against what her father had taught her.
Stay neutral.
Yeah. They poked light fun at their friends, which John thought was great because as a minister's daughter, she was expected to be a little bit more prim. And with this thing, I think that one of the things in a relationship that's good is when you and your spouse or partner or whatever dislike the same things in people.
Oh, I agree.
You don't have to like all the same stuff. You don't have to be like overwhelmed with happiness for a hobby or something or an actor. But when you dislike the same ones, it definitely works.
I mean, I would even just say just disliking a lot of the same things. You know what I mean? I think is like a big part of relationships in general. You know, it's not just what you like, it's what you don't like.
Well,
you know?
So Aaron and I, neither of us care for sports.
There you go.
And it's perfect. Because if one of us was like really into sports, that would just be like, I've dated people who were like way into sports. And then you're like, okay, like all of the fall, the weekends are just devoted to that.
Yep. Kat and I work out because we dip into being sports fans. So like,
we'll watch the Super Bowl.
Yeah, if the Angels are in town, I'm going to go to Coors Field. I'm going to watch the Angels. I'm going to root for the Angels. I'm going to put my jersey and my hat and we're going to have a good old time. When we go up to like Colorado State and watch a football game, Kat's going to put on her jersey and she's going to root and rah-rah. And like she gets into it.
I think it's fun to go to a sporting event.
Agreed.
But I don't care about watching and keeping up with sports.
Except for I'm a total bandwagoner. been watching Wrexham games more and more and more as time has gone on. English football. It's the team that Rob McElhenney and Ryan Reynolds bought, and they're making a TV show about it, and it's awesome, and the team is great, and they're doing really good, and they're just a blast to watch. So it's been fun.
I mean, okay, so actually, here's a shout out. Hey, Danae and Joe, Erin's boss and her husband.
That's right. You said they're fans of the show.
They're fans of the show. So, hey guys. Actually, she's starting a podcast. I can't remember. It's something about like entrepreneurship. She's like
sweet.
She's like winning a 40 under 40 award in a few weeks.
Dang.
There's like a big dinner.
Well done.
Yeah. And I can't win that anymore because I'm over 40. Anyway, like they took us to a soccer game, and I had a great time going to the soccer game.
Totally.
But I don't remember who played.
Yeah, it was like Jamie's wife, Jess. At one point, she had a coworker who was like the captain of some lacrosse team. So we went to go watch this lacrosse game. I'm not a lacrosse person at all, but it was awesome.
Yeah, I think it's fun to go to the sporting event and like enjoy the excitement. Now, granted, when the Dallas Mavericks won the championship, like about 10 championship, that was a bad sickness. It was like about 10 years ago. I was watching that. Like if one of the hometown teams, if the Denver team or a Dallas team is like in a big series, I'm going to pay attention. Although I guess the Texas Rangers were in the World Series last year and I didn't watch any of that.
Nobody likes the Rangers, so.
No, people like the Rangers, but
nobody likes the Rangers. Aubrey.
Nolan Ryan was the guy when I was a kid.
Rangers. Nolan Ryan played for the Angels too.
Well, there you go. See? Anyway, but no, I mean, and I definitely think like if like there's a couple that you're like, ugh, yeah, they're so annoying, and together you can be like, ugh.
No,
not to be mean.
No judgment for those couples that are super into that stuff, but I will say there is something a little bit like, oh boy, when I see like the couples that are super into the sports teams and stuff. Whatever, live your lives, be happy. I mean, not here to judge you.
I don't know. On the flip side, like my friend Liz and her husband, like Matt, they're really into sports together and they enjoy that together.
Exactly.
So I think that's good, but like. I think that disliking the same things in people can be helpful.
Okay, let's say this.
Not in a malicious way.
Not to say that I wouldn't enjoy your friends or anything like that, but instinctually, I would go, those are probably not going to be my people. You know what I mean? That are like the sports couple.
Oh, yeah. No. Well,
generally speaking. And not always. I'm just saying, generally speaking, the super crazy sports couple is not going to be my people.
Well, it's funny, too, because Liz is, she is really into, Priscilla is extremely into sports. My friend Priscilla. But also they're into other stuff too. I just love that I don't have to watch football games, sports ball every Saturday and Sunday, and sometimes Thursdays and sometimes Mondays, and forever in the fall. But
Kat's really into Sand Sphere.
I don't know what that is.
That's volleyball on the beach.
Oh, okay. Like playing it or watching it?
I'm actually just joking. She's been coaching volleyball.
Yeah, I know.
In Tim and Eric, it's what they call volleyball. Anyways, continue.
Yeah, I don't know. Actually, my friend Simone plays volleyball a lot. She's not like professional or anything, but
she's coaching it for like her little, middle school.
Yeah,
and stuff
no,
like
I know.
That
And she like injured herself, and
yeah, she tries to teach them how to dive, and she hurt her knee. Poor thing.
It's tough.
Getting older's tough. Anyhow.
Anyway, okay. So these letters had a little bit of gossip in them. They referred to each other with their pen names. He was Lysander, the Spartan hero.
Ooh.
She was his Diana, after the Roman goddess of the moon.
Oh.
In one letter, she shared with him some of his faults, and it seemed like it was an indirect way for her to tell him that she was a bit intimidated by his physical presence. In writing, she wasn't afraid to say what she meant, but when he was there in person, she'd get a little bit intimidated.
Interesting.
She'd spoken with someone else recently, and they said they felt the same about him, which comforted her. Like, I guess he had such an assuming presence.
Yeah.
That I don't know. So John's response to this was a, quote, list of her faults, but actually they were like a list of virtues.
Like when you're interviewing and you're like, I'm just too devoted to my job.
Yes.
I work too hard.
Yes.
He's like, oh, you're too beautiful for me. And your words are so wise that I sometimes can't keep up with you. Like,
exactly.
I love it.
And during all this time reading these letters and the commentary about them, it was like they were smitten. They were totally
He's
smitten.
fawning, it feels like.
Oh, yeah. Hard. They'd poke fun at each other, but they were also in awe of each other and sometimes a little bit intimidating. It kind of reminds me of high school. You know, when you have a crush on someone, do Do you remember the feeling of being in love as like a 14 or 15-year-old?
Oh, dude, I still to this day... Lydia Teague. That's what I'll tell you right now. Lydia Teague, back in the day when I was a little man, was just like, oh boy, for whatever reason, she's the one for me. And then like,
I love how you sound like Mickey Mouse.
Because I was a total freaking Mickey Mouse little boy. and anyways, the years go by, and then you realize this person is not going to give you the time of day, and you got to move on. But that was not the case with them. They were into it, and I love it.
I mean, did you also? Okay, so this is kind of funny. I mean, I would feel that way about people in my class. I was so boy crazy when I was young, but like, I would get nervous talking to them. But also, I do that around like for celebrities. Like, I'd see a video, a Matchbox 20 video. Rob Thomas, I love you, Rob Thomas. I still love you. And I would have that like breathlessness. You're like, oh, I'm just so like. The hormones are crazy when you're young, and your brain is so goofy and stupid, and like you're just like dizzy with obsession.
Foggy with obsession.
Yes, foggy with obsession, dizzy with obsession. I saw this very cute video. It was a concert. Matchbox 20's touring this year. I saw them last summer, and they were excellent.
I know you did.
This young girl, probably 13, 14, 15, somehow she was up on stage, and she was singing Push, like Rob Thomas and her were face to face, and he was like singing it, and it was just so cute. And I was like... I just like hit my pop filter because I'm so excited and like moving my hands around.
Animated.
But I was like, I probably would have had a 13-year-old heart attack if that had been me.
Oh, totally, dude.
I would have keeled over. I'm
trying to think who would have been that for me when I was that age. Probably. If you remember the show Smallville?
Yeah.
Kristen Cruick.
Okay.
The Lana Lang.
Okay, that would have been your.
Oh my goodness! But back in the day, whoo. Number one.
Yeah.
She was gorgeous. But that's also one of those really funny things. I don't know if you feel the same way. No, you said Rob Thomas. You still are in love with him.
I mean,
I look back on these people.
I don't know who's not in love with Rob Thomas. He's an amazing human being.
I mean, I'm not in love with him, but that's okay. Not in any bad way. Just like, I don't know. But even somebody like Kristen Cruick, I'll look back on and like look at photos of her, or I'll see an episode of Smallville or whatever, and I'll be like, dude, I don't get it anymore. Like, I've just, objectively, still you look at it and go, oh, you're beautiful for sure.
I could
but
say
the
that.
weird, like, oh man, I can't even handle how gorgeous you are. Like, dude, this is gone,
I think that's something about the hormones, like leveling out and your frontal cortex, like completing or something like that. But like, I definitely still feel that way about Rob Thomas. And I'm like so happy with social media that it exists, so I can like get funny snippets of like him. They have him and Paul is one of the other band members, and they just do these funny little sketches where they ask him questions. It's cute.
My modern day one would be Stevie Nicks.
Oh, well, there you go.
Come on. Anyway.
Yeah.
We can move.
I was drinking out of a witch's cauldron cup, and she's a witchy woman.
She cast a spell on me.
I mean, she's cast a spell on all of us.
I mean, come on.
American
I think there
treasures.
are very few, like, at least, I mean, not even just American men. I think there are probably very few, let's say, heterosexual men out there that aren't seeing Stevie Nicks even now and being like, yeah, I mean, she's pretty.
That voice.
It's just the whole package, man.
Now I'm just going to put it out in the universe. Stevie Nicks, Rob Thomas, duet, doing something, making a new song for us.
Or even more into the universe, Stevie, call me. I jest.
Yeah. Now, where was I? Leaving the high school heart butterflies away. Okay. John and Abigail were finally able to marry in October of 1764. In preparation for the wedding, they had to hire some servants who would work for them after they got married in their home.
Sure.
They were going to live on land inherited by John from his father, who had passed 3 years earlier. His mother and brother were living just next door.
Okay.
John was involved in hiring the servants, which was not super common. Usually that'd be left to the wife. But it led to the hiring of an African-American freed slave named Judah. And Judah had worked for John's father before John's father's death. Judah didn't really seem to like Abigail much. But she was less expensive than other servants. And since Abigail's mother-in-law, Susanna, had suggested Judah, Abigail acquiesced to the request and wrote to John, I am very willing to submit to some inconveniences in order to lessen your expenses. The other servant was named Rachel Marsh, who John described as, quote, a clever girl, which I just think of Jurassic Park, yes, and a neat one. But I thought it was interesting too, because in that line, Abigail said, in order to lessen your expenses, because she didn't have expenses.
Yeah.
She was just the wife.
Sure.
It was John's expenses.
Yeah.
So just interesting, because I would say our expenses.
True. But maybe she just wasn't at that point yet in the relationship.
Yeah, I mean, they weren't even married yet, but yes. So Abigail Smith and John Adams were finally married on October 25th, 1764, at Reverend Smith's parsonage in Weymouth. Reverend Smith, like many pastors, picked specific verses to read during the ceremony. For his eldest daughter, Mary, who'd married Cranch, he had chosen Luke 10:42 that said, "Mary hath chosen that good part." 10 years later, when his youngest daughter, Betsy, would marry Reverend John Shaw, he would quote John 1:6 and said, quote, "There was a man sent from God whose name was John."
Okay.
So he picked people, verses that were related to the names of the men.
It's really funny that he's like completely misusing those quotes, but I love it anyways.
It's fine. You probably know more than me. Now, Reverend Smith and his wife had publicly delayed the marriage of Abigail to John for about 3 years. Reverend Smith chose, quote, "For John the Baptist came neither eating bread nor drinking wine, and ye say, he hath a devil."
Jeez, man.
Now, this is a bit of hearsay. Charles Francis Adams claimed in his 1840 memoir, and this was the grandson of Abigail and John, claimed in his 1840 memoir that the Weymouth congregation were against the match. So even the congregants weren't into this John-Abigail marriage.
Well, hopefully they weren't doing the if anybody objects, then
I guess they didn't, because it ended up happening. A young lawyer was not a good enough match for the Honorable Parson's daughter. And Reverend Smith and wife Elizabeth had been holding out hope that someone would come along with a more honorable career, a better background than the son of a middle-class farmer, and with more money so that Abigail could marry up like her mother Elizabeth, or like her father had to Mother Elizabeth, because Elizabeth Quincy was wealthy. But though historians have said this passage was a dig, the author of my primary source ascertains that quote about John the Baptist was actually a verse about John the Baptist having been unfairly maligned.
Whoa.
And so it was an olive branch.
Interesting.
But it sounded pretty bad.
It does. It sounds like a dig, but I guess if you put it into that context where it's sort of like, hey, look, at first it was like this, but it's actually John the Baptist. I get it. Okay.
Now, despite the fact that John had made derogatory comments in his diary about Parson Smith years before, his entries after he married Abigail would often include maxims imparted by Parson Smith that he'd shared with Abigail, who she shared with John, and they would share with their children. And so maxims, like,
I've never heard that
statements and
I didn't know that's what that meant.
Yeah.
I'm ashamed. I'm thinking of the scantily clad men's magazine, I guess, but with women that are scantily clad.
It's a short, pithy statement expressing a general truth or role of conduct.
Okay.
Rule of conduct. That's just me not reading
expanded.
that. Yeah. So almost like short parable. Just like
I like it. I get it.
So they didn't. John would write these maxims in his diary, being like, my father-in-law said this, and putting it in there. Now, the Reverend Smith had delayed the marriage. Again, the olive branch had been offered, and John took it. And he and his father-in-law became friends from then on out. Also, I mentioned that Parson Smith had been a shrewd businessman in addition to a man of God. Abigail had been worried that her dowry would be small, but I guess Dad came through. And John later recollected that his father-in-law was, quote, the richest clergyman in the province, and the dowry was, quote, a very handsome sum of money, enough to purchase an orchard of a very fine piece of land near my paternal house and homestead.
Whoa.
So I guess the dowry wasn't so bad.
Doesn't sound like it. You could buy some land with it.
Mm-hmm. Now, after the wedding, John and Abigail lived in a 2-story house with a barn and 40 acres of farmland. The roof was steep to prevent accumulation of snow. They lived next door to John's mom, so Abigail took to her first task, getting in the good graces of her mother-in-law, Susanna. She was adapting to a new house, her husband, and her mother-in-law next door. Of her more than 2,000 letters, none detailed the day-to-day of her young married life because that work was kind of assumed for the women of her time.
Sure.
There was no point to write out regular activities and chores that she was responsible for because they weren't unique. But one thing that was notable was the commingling of habits. For example, before marriage, John would sleep with the shutters open at night during the summer, filling the house with the salty sea air. But Abigail said that he was not allowed to do that anymore because they lived on a main road in Braintree, and she didn't want to have the shutters open and let people see in and have the sounds and all the things coming in.
That makes sense.
So they didn't open the shutters until mid-morning, and John complained to Cranch that it kept him sleeping in later than he would like to. It's too dark in there. I'm not waking up with the natural light.
Gosh, she made it more comfortable. Ugh.
I don't know. I'd probably want the windows open.
But if he's like, hey, man, it helped me sleep in, like, I get it that it'd be like a little bit of annoyance, but I don't know.
I
It's
mean,
just
I
funny
think he
to
was
me.
like early to bed, early to rise probably, but
Sure.
I don't know. Now, Abigail was also frustrated by how much John would read the newspaper. He was apparently more focused on things like the Stamp Act, which resulted in attacks on American newspapers, college diplomas, deeds, lawsuits, and other legal documents, even playing cards.
Oh, wow.
It was a foreshadowing to the smoldering conflict that would lead to things to come in a short time. Now, at first, Abigail and her sister lived close together. In that first year of marriage, they saw each other frequently. But then a year later, Mary and Cranch moved to Salem, and Abigail was saddened, writing, "Oh, my dear sister, I mourn every day more the great distance between us." So she got a little sad. Her sister wasn't around.
And this was, by the way, everybody, way after the Salem witch trials, so no worries.
Yeah, touche. They had their first child, also named Abigail, which is funny because Victoria named her daughter Victoria, and you just don't see women naming Victoria. That was the one, wasn't that the one
Victoire?
named Pussy?
Oh, that's right. Pussy.
And Abigail was nicknamed Nabby, so same nickname that Abigail Adams had Abigail Smith had when she was young. She was born on July 14th, 1765. I thought it seemed like a kind of tight window. So I used a conception calculator, and it said that if someone was born on July 14th, their conception was on or around October 22nd, which is spot on for Abigail getting pregnant on the wedding night. That said, it's estimated that 1/3 of brides were pregnant on the day they got married in Puritan New England. This included Paul Revere's wife, Abigail's sister Mary, and John's brother's wife.
So you never know.
Just people getting busy.
I think in one of the previous letters, it was like, our temptations almost got the best of us, and maybe they did.
I did look, it was like, because they got married, I think it was like an extra week and a half, but they did say that the baby might have been like a week or two early.
Sure.
So it was probably right after the wedding.
It's a maybe. It's a 50-50.
Elizabeth Quincy wouldn't let me go to the party because of this cough. By age 1, Nabby was, quote, fat as a porpoise and reportedly, quote, fell heavy and would sadly bruise her forehead.
Oh my gosh.
Because of this, Abigail asked Mary to lend her the, quote, quilted contrivance, which was a makeshift helmet that they'd use for Mary's daughter, Betsy Cranch. So they had like a helmet because the babies would fall over and bonk their heads.
That's kind of fun.
Nabby's birth was followed up with the birth of a brother on July 11th, 1767, 3 days before Nabby's second birthday. So two under two, but almost like Nabby turned 2. But
wow.
He was named John Quincy after Abigail's dying grandfather. John Adams, not John Quincy. John Adams worried about the finances now that he had 2 children, writing to his friend Cranch and saying, quote, Johnny must go to college and Nabby must have the fine clothes. So must Betsy too, and the other. Betsy and the other Cranch's children. Betsy and the other that John just hadn't learned her name yet. Her name was Lucy. He's like, Betsy, your other kid.
Hey, the other one you got.
Little Lucy
I
Cranch.
hate to say that I can relate to that.
No, it's like, the kids. Yeah. Anyway, he continued, there must be dancing schools and boarding schools and all that, or else, we shall not give them polite educations. And they will better not have been born, than not to have polite educations. These anticipations are not very charming to me. He was basically saying, like, we shouldn't have even had kids if we weren't gonna like give them great educations and fancy clothes.
Right, and he's
Like-
basically saying that these bits of anxiety that I have to be handling of like I need to get them money for nice clothes and for college. She's like,
I'm not happy.
This isn't charming.
I'm not
this
happy
Isn't
about
fun. All that like people are talking about being a dad all the time. How great it is. This isn't so great. That's what it sounds
The
like to me.
financial reality has hit me, Cranch.
Exactly.
Of course, Cranch continued to be a bad businessman, so his financial worries were a lot more than John's. Abigail would politely blame his Cranch's failures on suppliers and customers.
Okay.
It's not him, it's the people he's working with.
Ah, yes, obviously.
Abigail was ever on the lookout for positive and negative examples of other couples. When John's cousin, Samuel Adams, and his wife Elizabeth visited in July 1766, Abigail observed that they were, quote, a charming pair. In them is to be seen the tenderest affection toward each other. Without any fulsome fondness, friendship full exerts her softest power, which is a perfect example of the bond between a husband and wife that Abigail was looking for.
And sorry, who was this again? I missed it.
Samuel Adams, John's cousin, and his wife.
How did I not know that Samuel Adams was John Adams' cousin?
He was.
That's a fun little fact. I mean, I have the same last name, but you just assume that it wouldn't be. Okay, that's really cool.
I mean, it was a small area.
No, it makes perfect sense. It's just one of those strange, like, oh, wow, weird. Okay, yeah.
Well, and at the time, Samuel had just organized the successful colonial resistance to the Stamp Act that John had been fretting over. So his cousin kind of took care of it. Mm-hmm. All in all, Abigail was glad with her situation, as being married to John meant she was out from under the thumbs of her parents. They'd been rather overprotective in her youth. She was kept back from many events as a child because of her mother's fear of disease. She'd been kept from attending that social event in one season of the year at a Harvard graduation because her mother was so concerned that she had a small cold. Abigail's little sister, Betsy, was still unmarried and living with Reverend Smith and Elizabeth. In the summer of 1766, Betsy was supposed to either visit Abigail or marry just one of her sisters. And their mother, Elizabeth, said no because Betsy's cough was too bad. And then later she said, it's just too hot out. So she was just a helicopter parent before they were helicopter parents.
Maybe she just sensed troubles a brewing. You know what I mean?
I mean, maybe. I think it was she just wanted to keep him from getting ill because she saw all those children die in the diphtheria epidemic. I don't know. But she definitely liked to have her daughters close. In reality, Abigail's biggest issue with John at the time was his work travel. He would be gone for days or weeks. 12 years later, Abigail would say, in the 12 years we've been married, I believe we've not lived together more than 6.
Jeez.
So he's gone half the time.
Jeez.
Because of his absence, Abigail had to take over duties that he would have typically taken on, which was pretty common for the time. The term was called deputy husbands. And it was not considered unfeminine to work the harvest or in the shop if there was one. John would delegate his tasks in letters to Abigail while he was on the road, and then she would redelegate them to his workers or complete some of them herself, even to the point that she would sometimes help with his law practice.
Oh, wow.
And I didn't put it in here, but there was a quote about he was like, I'm traveling and this court date is coming. And if I'm not back, you're going to have to go over there and tell them I'm not there or something like that. He was like, I may have to send you.
Oh, wow.
I don't know why he couldn't get back, but I think he did actually get back. Now, by 1768, John was away so much that he moved the family up to Boston with him so that they wouldn't be apart. Abigail had mixed feelings about this. She was glad to be with John more than she had been, but she was sad to be away from her sisters and friends. It didn't mention that she was sad to be away from her parents. Boston at the time had about 16,000 residents, and it was built on a peninsula, and it was not set up in a nice orderly grid system like New York or Philadelphia. The roads supposedly followed old cow paths, but they said that the routes were so crooked and convoluted that any self-respecting cow wouldn't go that way because it wasn't the shortest distance between 2 points.
I have heard, I've never been to Boston, but I've heard that it is exactly like that. It's just like there's really no semblance to how the streets work.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy, but it's pretty cool. It's like I'm sitting here going like, can we get to Boston by the time we had to record the last episode?
No, I would love to. And Jamie, who's from Boston again, he and I have talked about how like I really want to go like for like whatever, a couple day long trip with him just so we can go to like Fenway and eat around at awesome little local yummy, delicious spots and stuff. So anyhow,
when I went to Boston, one time it was just for like 2 days because it was when I lived in New York and New Jersey and stuff. So we just kind of took the train up, or no, we drove actually. But anyway, we went on a duck boat.
Okay.
Which is like a boat that can drive on the road, but then can drive into the water and be a boat.
Yeah, I've heard of those.
It was fun.
That's cool.
I was like, I'd do that again. I used to like turn my nose up at touristy things, but like,
oh, they're touristy for a reason.
yeah, it's kind of fun to do silly touristy things. Like I like to be somewhere long enough that I can also go do some things that are like, where do the locals eat and all that stuff.
Dude, it was when we were in California, we did the Winchester Mystery House.
Is that the Black Dahlia house or the one in
that was really briefly because we need to move on from it. But Helen Mirren did a movie. It was called Winchester 10 years ago, not even.
Oh.
And it's a true story. It was basically this woman who I can't remember her name, but she was the heiress to the Winchester repeating rifle fortune.
Oh, okay.
And believed supposedly that she was being haunted by the ghosts of all of those that her family legacy had been responsible for killing.
Ooh.
Because the Winchester repeater was called the gun that won the West.
Huh.
So when she moved to California with just unlimited amounts of money from the Winchester fortune, because her husband passed away, she was told by a psychic to build a house and that it could never stop being built because the sound of nails and wood being driven and sawed and everything like that would draw away the spirits. And additionally, the house needed to be built in such a way that the spirits would get confused. So as you're walking through the house, for example, the early part of the tour, the guy, and I have pictures I'll show you, the guide is like, oh, and over here is the famous stairway to nowhere. And it's literally, you look and it is a stairway that goes up to a ceiling.
Huh.
And you
I
can't
really
go
want
past
to go
it.
there.
It's amazing. There's a door to nowhere that literally, if you open it and walk outside, you'll fall 12 feet.
Oh, yikes.
Just like
Danger.
Straight down. It is a very, very beautiful house. Very neat. You gotta go.
Cool.
Anyhow.
Yes, touristy things are cool. Well, Boston was loud, dirty, and stinky, with animals grazing everywhere. And in the summers, it was hot and smellier than ever. I was making me think of like in the Victoria series when they're talking about how stinky it got in London.
Yeah. Even in their castle, because it was all the sewage from the remember the kitchen?
Yeah.
It's gross. Anyway.
Yeah. And if you remember, like, London had been built for quite a while. Boston was brand new.
Yep.
There weren't sewers, I don't think. In addition to the Adams moving to Boston, so had General Thomas Gage and about 10,000 of His Majesty's troops. This was said to be a cost-cutting measure, but in reality, it was to get the colonialists in check. The imperial officials called urban mobs, they had already nullified the Stamp Act, and the crown was not going to let the Townshend duties, which were taxes on paint, lead, gas, wine, and tea, be nullified as well. So they were like, you urban mobs have got to cut it out. We're going to come here and be a presence, so you chill out. Now, the locals didn't love the troops there. A few merchants did okay because they got contracts for food and supplies for the soldiers. The rest were in competition with them. When off duty, soldiers were moonlighting and taking jobs from Bostonians. The troops bullied the locals. Army sergeants liked to keep the soldiers in tip-top shape, and they would run drills in peacetime. They also liked to do this in Brattle Square, which was right in front of John and Abigail's house.
Oh, wow.
On December 28th, 1768, Abigail gave birth to Susanna, who was a frail child, and was taken back to Braintree only a few months later to be taking care of servants and keep her away from the pollution of Boston. In the fall of 1769, she was pregnant again. Even though John was traveling a lot for work, I guess they seemed to find time to get together. Unfortunately, Abigail's attempt at helping Susanna's health failed, and she died on February 4th, 1770. Just months before Charles Adams would be born, the fourth child, on March 2nd, some Bostonian colonial workers were taunting a British soldier who was in search of part-time work. They said that they would only hire a soldier to, quote, go and clean my shit house. You can bleep that if you want to. No. A few days later, a Bostonian barber had his unqualified apprentice cut the hair of a British officer. So, like, he was like, here, this guy that doesn't know how to do it, you cut his hair. And when the officer refused to pay for the haircut, the apprentice attempted to collect anyway, and then he was beaten.
Oh, wow.
This really riled up the colonists, who gathered around the customs house, which is where duties were collected on imports. They started throwing things like snowballs, rocks, oyster shells, and shards of glass. Someone unknown shouted, "Fire!" and the soldiers ended up killing 5 townspeople. This was known as the Boston Massacre. There's no record of Abigail's thoughts on this, but the event was one that had significant impact on relations between American colonists and the British, and was a precursor to the American Revolutionary War, a war in which John would become a leader and of which Abigail would become the strongest female voice. And with that, we will pause until the next episode, and things are going to get actionable. Hot. I don't know.
Things are going to heat up.
Things are going to heat up.
Sweet, dude. I know just a little bit about the Boston Massacre. I won't say anything, so it'll be saved for your narrative that you're putting together. But I'm excited to learn more about it, and it feels like we're like just getting so close to the American Revolution.
I mean, this was 1770, and like 1776 was the I mean, things are about to go down.
Things are about to ignite. The powder keg is set.
The powder keg is set, and it was literally a powder keg.
Yeah, man. Oh, dude, I'm excited. I want to know more about this. Well, sweet. This has been an awesome little introduction so far into the series, and I want to know more. How long are you thinking this one's going to be so far?
Probably 5 or 6.
5 or 6.
I'm going to attempt to avoid an 8 thing. I do think that like the amount of material I have to research is slightly less than. I mean, Victoria was the queen of the world, basically.
There's a lot of stuff.
Not that Abigail Adams wasn't important, but I think that also like the length of time between her life and now too, and I don't know, but
for sure.
Yeah, I'm going to try and keep it at 5 or 6.
Cool. Excited to see where all of it goes. I'm even excited just to learn about the kids and stuff like that. I know very little about John Quincy Adams. I always remember Anthony Hopkins playing him in Amistad.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if you remember that.
I saw that. It's one of those ones that you know how it is. Like sometimes you see a movie when it comes out. I saw it in the theater. I remember being like, wow, Oscars, hooray. And then like, I just never saw it. I don't know.
I feel like John Quincy is one that I want to put down on my list for a future biography as well, because he's one of those names in American history that I feel like you know, but I know very little about him. I mean, I think, quite honestly, apart from knowing that he's John Adams' son, he was
the 6th president.
He was the 6th president, and he was in Amistad. He was involved with the Amistad case. Like those are honestly, that's about all I know about John Quincy Adams, and it makes me want to know more because it feels like the family legacy over there is just insane. You know?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it too, like we're talking about Cranch, he immigrated. Like there's a few. Like 1,100 people in a settlement. Like it's just not that many people.
Right.
And so, yeah, they all knew each other. I mean, think about how big even 100 years later, 150 years later, Mabel Dot, like all these people were running in the same circles.
It's true.
And so, I don't know, the world was just smaller then. I don't know.
Well, it's been awesome. I'm excited to see where this all goes. Anything else you want to add before we get into, I guess, a couple of ending notes here?
No, I'm just going to play Avicii Wake Me Up when you're done with your sign-offs.
I guess we can technically play it in the background because we're not using the actual file to play in live stream or whatever.
I don't know what the rules are. We'll just play it when we're done. If anybody, go listen to it.
Avicii. Okay, well then I guess last thing really quick before we wrap up here. At this point we're trying to be limited with the amount of just like willy-nilly sponsors we're going to be just shouting out or whatever. We always do like to give a little shout out to McQueen Pipes in case anybody is curious and is in the market for some type of a new smoking apparatus. Go check out McQueenPipes.com. You can use the code biographers at checkout. That's going to get you 15% off of your order. Again, that's McQueenPipes.com. And then I always like to give a shout out to my buddy Akiva. Go check out Metalwork by Meola, MEOLA.com. You can use the code biographers at checkout there. You're going to get 10% off of your order. That's all for all your chef's knives needs, custom knife making, custom metalworking, all that good stuff. Go ahead and check out metalworkbymeola.com for all that. Anything else, Aubrey?
No, I think that's about it. Thanks for listening about Abigail Adams. Abigail Smith Adams.
Abigail Smith Adams. Yeah, everybody, thanks for listening. As always, thanks for tuning in and the continued support. And I guess we'll see you for part 2 of Abigail next time.
Thanks, guys.
And Aubrey, hopefully you'll be feeling better and have your voice at 100%.
I won't be Phoebe Buffet anymore.
Hey, I think regardless, you did a great job and was good. So
Yeah.
all is well.
I didn't even take a cough suppressant before this. I think I did okay.
Hey, I think you did great.
I'm on the mend.
Hey, like I said, I had to do this for Mabel Part 5. I was like, had bronchitis and was
And then,
hey,
I
let's
forgot
go do it.
because
I know.
it's so notable. We should stop.
Anyhow. All right, well, thanks everybody, and we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to The Biographers. For more information, please visit thebiographerspodcast.com.